Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into the dusty cobblestone streets of early colonial America, where the air smells like smoke, livestock, and moral righteousness. You find yourself trudging toward the center of a sleepy little town, wooden houses leaning slightly like they're tired, fences crooked, the sun low in the sky and hot against your linen collar. There's no real crime here. Just the sort of place where people get punished for owning the wrong kind of hat or chewing too enthusiastically on the Sabbath. Right in the middle of this otherwise unremarkable village square, your eyes catch on something. Two upright wooden beams, joined at the top by a horizontal board. It's not a decorative archway or quaint construction project. Nope, it's the stocks, a mechanism that invites your legs in, but definitely doesn't let them out until the town's moral sensibilities feel satisfied. And yes, someone's already in them. A teenage boy, probably 17, red-faced from the sun, shoeless, his ankles tightly held between the clamping boards. He's not screaming. He's not crying. He's just stuck. An older woman walks by and drops a cabbage leaf at his feet. Not out of kindness. Because it's rotten. A child toddles past and pokes him with a stick. No one's really shocked by this. It's normal. You stand awkwardly, watching, until a local informs you, he skipped firewood collection duties to go fishing. Ungodly idleness, she says, nodding solemnly, like it's the eighth deadly sin. In colonial America, punishment didn't need to be dramatic. It needed to be visible. Public shame was the preferred method. Quiet, effective, and extremely affordable. You didn't need a prison complex, just some sturdy timber and a central square. Stocks were usually reserved for what we'd call low-level offenses. Things like skipping church, breaking minor curfews, or even publicly disagreeing with your neighbor about how to churn butter correctly. For serious crimes, they had other ideas, but this was just a polite way of saying get your act together. The discomfort wasn't limited to your ankles, either. You'd be stuck there for hours, or even days, at the mercy of your neighbor's creativity. Spoiled food, rude drawings, whispered gossip, and the occasional donkey sniffing your hair. All fair game. The point wasn't just to punish, it was to display your failure to the community like a human caution sign. Historians still argue whether this method actually worked long-term. Did it deter misbehavior? Or did it just breed resentment and passive-aggressive revenge? What's certain is that the Puritans loved a punishment that involved minimal paperwork and maximum judgmental glances. Here's the thing about stocks, they were built with disturbing precision. The ankle holes weren't one size fits all, they were measured and carved to ensure you felt it. No squirming out. No clever wiggles. And if you tried to run before your sentence was done? That's a whole new offense, friend. That gets you the pillory. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You try not to stare too long at the poor guy in the stocks, but then you hear something worse, your name. Apparently, you, yes, you, were seen lingering suspiciously near the bakery earlier. That's enough for a brief detention. You smile, thinking it's a joke. It is not. You're gently but firmly guided toward the other set of stocks, because of course there's more than one, and invited to reflect on your actions. As your feet slide in and the wooden board clunks closed above your ankles, you realize something unexpected. This is mind-numbingly boring. That's the point. No screaming, no drama. Just sitting in awkward silence while people throw shade, and maybe radishes. One fringe tidbit, some villages customize their stocks with wooden nameplates above each occupant, carved in advance. Like a reserved parking spot. But for shame. Idlejohn. Wichian. Samuel the fence jumper. It was kind of an art form, and someone somewhere definitely took a little too much pride in their carving. Eventually, someone reads aloud a Bible verse and gives you a small sip of warm cider. This, apparently, means your time is up. The latch creaks open. Your ankles are sore. Your pride is bruised. But mostly, you're annoyed. You try to stand up gracefully but misjudge how stiff your legs have become. You stumble a little, catching the eye of the cabbage-wielding woman again. She smirks. You can already tell she's mentally writing your name on the next wooden nameplate. Evening falls. You limp away from the square, swearing to stay out of trouble. But deep down, you know this won't be your last visit to those uncomfortable wooden slots. Because in the colonies, the stocks weren't just punishment. They were a kind of community theater. Everyone got to participate, just not everyone had a script. You're barely off the square when you hear it, a sharp, rhythmic crack, followed by a muffled gasp. Then again, crack. It's not thunder. It's the sound of leather meeting flesh, and suddenly you remember that public humiliation wasn't the only tool in the colonial punishment kit. You follow the noise and see a small gathering near the whipping post, a tall, worn beam stained by time and human regret. And there, tied with rawhide straps, is a man no older than 30. Shirtless, arms outstretched. His back is already red from the first few lashes, and a man with sleeves rolled to the elbow, most likely the local constable, is delivering each strike with mechanical efficiency. It's not a frenzied, theatrical whipping like in the movies. No one screaming dramatically. There's no booming music in the background. Just the unsettling repetition of rope through air and the occasional grunt. You step closer. Big mistake. The town's clerk notices you loitering and begins to explain, as if giving a museum tour. This one blasphemed. Loudly. At dinner. Said grace with sarcasm. You glance at the condemned man, who gives a weak smile. I said, and I quote, "Dear Lord, please keep us from dying of boredom at another one of Governor Winthrop's sermons." Yep. That'll do it. Whipping in the colonies wasn't usually fatal. It wasn't even designed to scar, though it often did. It was, once again, mostly about public performance. A brief, painful correction that everyone was encouraged to watch so they'd remember not to say the wrong thing at the wrong time. And let's be clear, the wrong thing covered a lot of ground. Questioning authority. Questioning too enthusiastically. Talking during services. Talking too passionately about food. The line between a regular complaint and a whippable offense was basically invisible and moved depending on who was listening. Colonial justice was a mood. Historians still argue whether the average lash count had a standard. Some records say a dozen lashes was common, others claim it varied wildly, from a few gentle reminders to 39, no mercy. And there wasn't much in the way of appeal. If the magistrate was having a bad day, so were you. The whip itself varied, too. Sometimes it was simple leather. Other times, especially in harsher colonies, it was knotted or studded. You know, just in case humiliation and pain alone weren't enough. What made it worse was the social aftermath. You might survive the whip, but your reputation? Not so lucky. People would lower their voices when you entered the tavern. Parents would tug their children to the other side of the path. And heaven help you if you were unmarried. Your marriage prospects dropped faster than your dignity did during the punishment. But the man at the post today doesn't seem destroyed. He stands upright when it's over. Someone tosses him a shirt. He wipes his face, nods toward the crowd like a stage actor taking his bow, and walks away as if this happens all the time. You'd think it might leave you a bit shaken, but there's something strangely anticlimactic about it all. Like watching someone get a very stern parking ticket. Painful? Yes. Permanent? Probably not. Memorable? Definitely. One quirky tidbit you overhear: in some towns, whipping posts were decorated during the holidays. Garland, berries, sometimes even carved angels. Nothing like a little seasonal cheer to remind you that punishment never takes a day off. There's even debate among historians about whether some people preferred a quick whipping over a fine or time in the stocks. Get it over with, skip the shame, move on. Apparently, some habitual offenders requested it. You imagine a man in line going, "Just whip me, Ezekiel. I've got chores to do." As the crowd begins to disperse, a teenage boy beside you mutters something under his breath and gets a sharp cuff to the back of the head from his father. "Careful," he hisses. "You want to end up at the post next?" You walk away from the scene a little slower than before. The air feels heavier, and suddenly the idea of speaking freely seems exhausting. Your brain begins calculating risk at every thought. You sneeze, quietly, and then worry whether sneezing too loudly might be interpreted as a mockery of divine wrath. As you turn onto a dirt lane, your foot kicks something. A discarded bundle of thin rope. You stare at it for a moment, thinking of all the people who've felt its sting. It's frayed and stained. Useless now. Someone will probably burn it with the next batch of firewood. The sun dips lower, and the shadows grow long. You pass a young couple who nod politely but say nothing. Conversation feels rarer here than food. And far more dangerous. You begin to understand, The real punishment isn't the lash. It's the silence that comes after. You've managed to keep your mouth shut for most of the day, which is starting to feel like an accomplishment. But then, as you pass a window with hand-sewn curtains and a faint smell of stew drifting from the sill, you spot something scandalous: a man walking by with a hat. A very nice hat. Feathered. Tilted at a jaunty angle. It's practically a crime of fashion. Turns out, in early colonial America, it might literally be just that. You follow him with your eyes, admiring the hat, maybe a little jealous, and that's when two town elders approach the man with grim determination. No weapons, no shouting. Just the quiet authority of men whose job titles include phrases like Morals Committee. They take one look at his headwear and cluck disapprovingly. "You there?" says the elder with the longer beard. "That is a vain ornament, and wholly inappropriate for the Sabbath." The man stammers. "It's Tuesday." "We know," the other elder says. "But you purchased it on the Sabbath." Your eyebrows rise. Is that a real rule? Of course it is. The colonies, especially the more Puritan-flavored ones, were heavy on dress codes. Not just suggestions, actual laws about what you could wear, and when. Clothes weren't supposed to be too colorful, too rich, too fine, or too revealing. And no, revealing didn't mean what it does today. We're talking exposed ankles and button counts. This man's hat? Clearly a gateway to moral ruin. They find him on the spot. 2 shillings. A serious amount, considering most folks earn that in several days of honest work. He argues, lightly, but accepts the ticket like someone who's been through this before. You overhear one of the elders mutter, "Next thing you know, he'll be dancing." Historians still argue whether sumptuary laws, those fancy dress regulations, were ever really enforceable or just tools for shaming the middle class when they got too flashy. But enforcement did happen. Especially in the smaller towns where everyone knew everyone's closet by heart. You suddenly feel nervous about your own outfit. Not because it's scandalous, but because you bought it with imported buttons. And imported anything was often seen as showy. Or worse, ungodly indulgent. You pass a bulletin nailed to a fence post. It's a list of inappropriate adornments recently observed. It reads like the lost script of a colonial fashion police reality show. 3 crimson ribbons on a single bodice. Brass-buckled shoes without reason. Hats higher than modesty demands. The last line is underlined twice. Feathers are prideful. One fringe tidbit: feathers weren't just aesthetic, they had coded meanings. A white feather might signal mourning. A red one? Flirtation. A blue one? Probably meant you were French, which was almost as scandalous as being joyful. You imagine trying to explain this to someone from the future. "Yes, sir, I was sentenced to pay a fine and stand in church for 3 extra hours because I wore a peacock feather in my cap." They'd think you were writing satire. But the laws had serious teeth. You couldn't climb the social ladder by wearing your ambition. It was about keeping people in their place, visibly. Literally sewing the class system onto your sleeves. You meet a young woman named Charity who tells you she once received a public reprimand for stitching decorative vines along the hem of her apron. "I wasn't fined," she says, "just made to unpick every thread in front of the magistrate." "That sounds humiliating," you say. "It was," she replies. "But the embroidery took 20 hours. So technically, I was also robbed." She laughs softly. You get the sense she doesn't laugh much in public. Historians are split on whether these laws were enforced equally. Some suggest that local leaders often gave wealthier offenders a gentle warning, while the poorer folks faced full punishment. Others believe the rules were more about moral optics than real class warfare. Either way, it all felt deeply, soul-achingly tedious. You pass another poor soul being confronted by 2 stern-faced women for excessive boot shine. You didn't know that was a category. It's dusk now, and your own shoes suddenly feel too shiny. You scuff them quietly in the dirt. The town bell rings, signaling evening prayer. You slip into the crowd, head low, counting buttons on your coat to make sure you're under the socially accepted limit. 4. You're good. Still, as the prayer begins, you hear a voice near you whisper, "Is that wool dyed with imported indigo?" You hold your breath. No one answers. Probably safe. But your coat suddenly feels too warm, too noticeable. Colonial life wasn't just about survival. It was about visibility. Being seen, but not too seen. Standing out, even by accident, invited correction. And correction, in early America, was everyone's favorite neighborhood hobby. You think again of the man with the feathered hat. You never saw him take it off. Which means he probably had a second fine waiting when he got home. For repeating the offense. Or, more accurately, for daring to be interesting twice. By now, you've learned to walk with your eyes down and your expressions bland. Neutrality is survival. But it's not long before you wander past a small wooden building at the edge of town. It doesn't look like much, barely larger than a tool shed, with a simple sign above the door, Meeting House. No frills. No steeple. No bells. Inside, it's dead quiet. You peek through a small, uneven window and see a dozen people seated on benches. No one is talking. No one is reading. They're just sitting. Staring ahead. Occasionally blinking. You wonder briefly if this is a punishment too. A man outside notices your curiosity and says, "Quakers." They wait for the spirit to speak. Ah. That explains the silence. And the absence of a pulpit. You decide to step inside, out of curiosity, and, to be honest, a little out of boredom. The room is plain but clean. No candles. No crosses. Just quiet bodies and a floor that creaks gently beneath you. You sit. 10 minutes pass. Then 20. Then 40. No one says a word. And then, you do. Or rather, your stomach does. Loudly. A long, dramatic groan that echoes through the room like a trumpet solo. 12 heads swivel toward you. 12 faces full of gentle, horrified alarm. A small, kind-faced woman stands and whispers, "Friend, if thou art not yet moved by the Spirit, perhaps it is not thy time to speak." You mutter an apology. But it's too late. You've broken the unspoken rule of Quaker meetings: don't interrupt the silence unless you're absolutely sure it's divinely inspired. Later that evening, you're informed that your interruption has earned you a small punishment. Not the stocks. Not a fine. Just something worse, in a way, community correction. A Quaker elder asks you to attend 4 more silent meetings, without speaking. Not even a cough. It's meant to help you listen better. And reflect. You agree, of course. What else can you do? But you soon learn this isn't just a Quaker thing. Many early colonial sects imposed strange, quiet penalties for disrupting religious services. And not all of them were as gentle. In one Connecticut township, you might be assigned silent chores, meaning you clean the meeting house every day for a week. But if you say one word, the week resets. In another, offenders were given the listening chair, a designated seat in the corner, where you must sit for 2 full services while everyone else pretends not to glance at you. Historians still argue whether these quiet punishments were more effective than their noisier counterparts. Did they truly encourage introspection, or just teach people to suppress themselves better? You wouldn't call them painful. But the social pressure? That's something else entirely. You attend your next silent meeting with the kind of nerves most people reserve for dental visits. Every time someone coughs, your body flinches. You don't trust yourself to breathe too loudly. You become hyper-aware of every muscle in your body, especially the ones involved in digestion. And yet, in a strange way, the silence becomes comforting. Like background music made of nothing. You start to understand why people come here voluntarily. There's peace in stillness. One quirky historical detail: some early Quaker meetings had a designated silence monitor, usually an older man who sat near the front with a small stick. Not for hitting anyone, of course. Just for pointing at the offender and giving them the look. Which, somehow, felt worse. By your 4th meeting, you've nearly mastered it. You even catch yourself thinking, maybe I should speak. You feel something stirring in your chest, an idea. But the fear of being labeled impulsive holds you back. Outside, after your final meeting, the elder who punished you nods once and says, "Thou hast listened well." It's the closest thing to a parade you'll get around here. You walk away with a new appreciation for quiet, and a deep fear of sneezing. As the sun sets behind the wooden rooftops, you hear faint singing in the distance, a Methodist gathering, perhaps. Very different vibe. But you're not going anywhere near that tonight. You've had enough social risk for one day. Instead, you head toward the riverbank, where the only judgmental eyes belong to frogs. Your stomach gurgles again. Loudly. You freeze. But there's no one around this time, just the chirp of crickets and the lap of water against stone. And for the first time all day, you exhale without consequences. The next morning, You're woken not by a rooster, but by a hand tapping your shoulder, firm and disapproving. It's the town's tithingman, a man whose job is somehow both vague and relentless. He doesn't carry a weapon. Just a long staff dipped with two ends, a feather for waking ladies gently and a hard wooden knob for rapping sleepy men squarely on the skull. You rub your eyes. What's going on? You missed morning service, he says. And yesterday evening. That's twice now. Apparently, that's enough to trigger what they call a corrective invitation, colonial speak for you're coming to church whether you like it or not. But it gets worse. Because once you've been flagged as a Sabbath neglector, you're not just expected to attend. You're expected to be visible. As in, front row visible. And if you resist? Say hello to the pillory. Yes, the pillory. Like stocks, but for your face. You've seen it before, wooden boards hinged together, holes cut for your neck and wrists. It forces you to bow forward, like you're eternally apologizing. Very popular among those who missed a sermon, or worse, snored during one. You're told, gently but unmistakably, that this is your only warning. Miss another gathering and the pillory awaits. Public church attendance wasn't optional in many colonies, especially in Massachusetts Bay. The law didn't just suggest it, it mandated it. Skipping service wasn't just rude. It was illegal. Historians still argue whether the colonists genuinely believed in forced piety, or if they simply feared what an empty church might suggest about their grip on the community. After all, God may be all-seeing, but your neighbors? They're the ones who talk. And they will talk. One man tells you of his cousin Jonah, who once overslept and missed a Sunday service. Not only was he pilloried for 2 hours, his cow was also tied beside him, as if to publicly shame their entire household. The cow mooed the whole time. They say Jonah hasn't smiled since. Church in these colonies wasn't a relaxing affair. No soft pews, no cheerful hymns. It was a long, stifling ordeal. Sermons could stretch to 2 hours, or more if the preacher had recently found a new metaphor involving locusts. You sit rigidly through your own service that morning, heart thudding every time your eyelids flutter. Around you, others sit like statues. But occasionally, the tithingman moves through the aisles, staff in hand. You watch in morbid fascination as he gently brushes a dozing woman's cheek with the feather end, and 2 minutes later, bonks a young man squarely on the crown. He doesn't even flinch. Just nods and sits straighter. You realize that church here is not about inspiration. It's about endurance. The punishment of the pillory, however, wasn't exclusive to church attendance. It served many sins: slander, cheating, even excessive drunkenness. But Sabbath neglect? That was a special offense. You weren't just shirking community, you were shirking God. And in colonial towns, those two things were indistinguishable. One fringe tidbit: pillories were often built with footblocks behind them, not to support the accused, but to intentionally misalign their balance. It made escape impossible and discomfort certain. A design choice as passive-aggressive as everything else around here. And once you were in, there was the matter of what people did to you. The usual: spoiled vegetables, bad poetry shouted at close range, and on rare occasions, light tarring and feathering, but only if your crime was colorful enough. Yours wouldn't be. You're boring. That's the point. And yet the fear of being pilloried for something as dull as napping is somehow worse than if you'd been a swashbuckling rogue. You can feel it looming. That evening, someone posts a public list of Sabbath watch targets. Your name is there. So is your neighbor's goat. Again, unclear whether that's a joke. You try to redeem yourself the next day by arriving early to service. Too early, it seems, because the door isn't even unlocked yet. You sit outside on a stump, pretending you're deeply moved by the sound of distant bells. Someone walks past, squints at you, and says, "Atoning, are we?" You nod. There's no other safe answer. A gentle breeze rustles the trees. The air smells of pine and old bread. Somewhere in the distance, someone chops wood with rhythmic precision, each strike echoing like a ticking clock counting down to your next potential misstep. You think again about the pillory. The way it forces your neck into submission. The way your arms tingle from the awkward angle. You've never even been in one, but you feel it already. And still, somehow, it seems less painful than the sermon you'll be forced to endure again tomorrow. You're starting to think this town has more ways to humiliate people than it does roads. Today, As you head toward the blacksmith's shop in search of anything resembling excitement, or maybe just a horseshoe to trip over and fake an injury, you spot a woman walking through the main square with something bright stitched onto her clothing. At first, you think it's a fashion choice. But no. This is early colonial America. Fashion is a sin unless it's brown, gray, or maybe beige if you're feeling rebellious. The letter is large, red, and sewn right onto her bodice, a blocky B, surrounded by heavy embroidery. You raise an eyebrow. A local nods beside you and whispers, "Backbiter." "Excuse me?" Apparently, this woman had a habit of speaking ill of others. Gossip. Criticism. General sass. And while that might earn you a loyal TikTok following today, back then it earned you a literal badge of shame. Public marking wasn't limited to physical punishment or time in the stocks. Sometimes, they just made you wear your sin. And you didn't get to take it off until a council said so, which might be a few weeks or might be never. Colonial justice had no return policy. Historians still debate how widespread these embroidered punishments were. Were they primarily used for women? Probably. Were they inspired by Old Testament imagery? Almost certainly. Were they petty? Absolutely. You're told of other letters used throughout the colonies. For drunkard, L for lair, D for thief, F for fornicator, which was also code for, we don't want to say it out loud but everyone knows. Some were worn on the chest. Others on the sleeve. A few were hats. Yes, hat-based punishment was a thing. Imagine walking around with a tall felt cap that read idle tongue while trying to buy turnips. The woman with the B meets your gaze. You expect shame, but instead, you see boredom. Like she's done explaining herself to strangers. And maybe she has. Because here's the twisted truth, some people started wearing their letters like badges of pride. A woman forced to wear a C for contentious might stand straighter than the magistrate himself. Because sure, she argued, but she made sense, and everyone knew it. You think of Hester Prynne, the fictional figure who made the Scarlet Letter famous. But this is more mundane. Less literary. Just real people stuck in a system where mistakes became fashion statements. One fringe tidbit, in some towns, repeat offenses meant upgrading the embroidery. First a single red thread. Then block letters. Then borders. By your fourth offense, you were basically walking around in a full alphabet quilt. You ask a local what happens if someone refuses to wear their assigned letter. He frowns. Then they go to the cage. The repentance cage, a small wooden structure just big enough to sit in, often placed outside the meeting house. You'd stay there during services, letterless but still on display, which somehow made it worse. You're still marveling at the horror of it all when you're handed a piece of brown fabric and a needle. "Here," says the local woman. "You spoke sarcastically about the tithing man yesterday. That's at least a lowercase b for bitterness." You blink. She smiles. "Kidding." You don't laugh, because you're honestly not sure if she's kidding. Historians still argue whether these punishments had a long-term effect on moral behavior or just short-term spikes in textile sales. But one thing's clear, shame was stitched deeply into the colonial dress code. You continue your walk through town, hyper-aware now of every garment you pass. You spot a boy with an armband, probably a one-week punishment for swiping apples. A woman with no accessories, but a very plain scarf, which you now realize may be a signal too. You pull your coat tighter. Not because you're cold, but because you suddenly feel like every button is being judged. And maybe they are. Because in early America, morality wasn't personal. It was fashion. And your reputation was just another layer of clothing someone else could rip away. You wake the next morning to the sound of shears snipping nearby. Not sheep shearing, people shearing. The commotion draws you to the edge of the town square where a boy, perhaps 15, sits on a stool, tears welling in his eyes. Behind him, a stern-faced woman in a starched apron holds a large pair of scissors with the confidence of someone who's done this before. His golden hair tumbles to the dirt like wheat sheaves at harvest. You lean closer to another bystander. "What did he do?" "Too much vanity," the man replies with a shrug. "Kept slicking his hair with bare fat. Wanted curls. Now he gets clarity." You stifle a wince as another chunk of hair falls. There's no violence, no drama. Just ritual embarrassment, grooming as punishment. In some colonies, hair was political. Spiritual. A literal crown. For Puritans, especially, The wrong hairstyle was not just a matter of taste, it was evidence of moral weakness. Hair too long? That's pride. Hair cut in a worldly fashion? That's foreign influence. Hair curled or tied up with ribbon? Downright satanic. You look at your own reflection in a wash bucket and suddenly regret the half-hearted combing you did yesterday. Some of these punishments were local ordinances, crafted and enforced by community leaders with nothing better to do than micromanage your scalp. Others came from religious edicts, passed down like some divine grooming guide. Hair, in their eyes, was tied directly to the soul. Historians still argue whether hair shaving was used more on the young as a kind of moral correction, or if adults faced the same indignity. Most agree it was primarily a tool of conformity. If your appearance stirred too much attention, or worse, admiration, you'd be dealt with. Sometimes this meant cutting off your locks. Other times, they made you wear it differently. You'd be assigned a corrective bonnet or a modesty braid for styles that said, loud and clear, "Someone else controls my look now." One fringe tidbit: in one particularly conservative New England township, teenage boys caught using any kind of hair oil were required to attend Sunday service wearing a plain bowl cap, literally, a bowl turned upside down and fastened with string. Their peers, of course, would quietly laugh, which was also a punishable offense, but let's be honest, who could resist? You continue your walk through town and notice more signs: a man with a severe bowl cut and a red face. A woman wearing a drab cap that clearly wasn't part of her usual wardrobe. None of them speak to you. Their eyes focus on the ground, as if hoping the dirt might open and swallow their hairstyles. There's even a rumor, told to you in hushed tones over a plate of mushy turnips, that one town in the Massachusetts Bay Colony once shaved half the head of a woman who wore imported lace in public. To show imbalance of spirit, they said. The fashion police were not subtle. Of course, not everyone went quietly to the shears. Some fought back, symbolically, anyway. There were those who refused to wear the corrected styles or grew their hair back as quickly and rebelliously as possible. In time, some even left the colony altogether. "Too many rules for my follicles," said one man, according to a tavern tale you suspect has been exaggerated. Move to Rhode Island. They let you wear hats there, but here, hair was a sin waiting to happen. And there was no greater insult than appearing worldly. You spot a child with soft ringlets tied back by twine and wonder how long it'll be before someone decides he looks a little too fashionable for his own good. Even now, decades later, historians struggle to agree on just how widespread these practices were. Were they the exception, or the norm? Did some towns embrace hair punishment while others merely raised eyebrows and whispered behind closed doors? One thing's clear: the fear of attention, of standing out, permeated everything. Even your head. That evening, you walk with your hood up, though the weather's mild. Just in case. And when you finally remove your boots for the night, you notice a little patch of hair has flattened from where your cap pressed down all day. You fluff it up quickly, instinctively. Then pause, because even caring about your hair might get you noticed. And the shears are always waiting. You've managed, thus far, to stay mostly within the lines. You've avoided loud opinions, minimized eye contact, and kept your hair aggressively unimpressive. But this morning, things go sideways, literally. You take a shortcut past the meeting house, cutting across a field of muddy grass to avoid the long walk down the main path. A harmless detour. Or so you think. That is, until a small boy with oversized boots sees you and yells, "He's not using the Lord's path." You freeze. A woman raking nearby looks up. A man loading firewood drops a bundle. You now have 5 pairs of eyes on you, each reading your action as something far worse than laziness. You've committed an invisible but very real colonial offense, straying off the moral path, literally and figuratively. And the punishment? Not the stocks. Not a fine. Not even a haircut. It's banishment. You try to explain. "I was just cutting through. I didn't know." A nearby elder squints. "Didn't know?" The signs are posted plainly. You glance around. Sure enough, a small wooden plaque near the fence reads, "By order of the council, this field is sanctified for meditative purpose. Use only designated paths." Because of course it is. You plead your case, but you already know it's over. The punishment isn't harsh, but it's deeply annoying. You are ordered to leave the settlement for 48 hours. No town, no tavern, no chapel, no people. Just the woods. And your thoughts. You're escorted to the edge of town by two very polite men, one of whom gives you a chunk of dry bread and a mild warning: if you see bears, speak softly. They're Baptists. It's a joke. Maybe. Historians still argue whether short-term banishment was used primarily as moral correction or simply as a way to temporarily remove social friction. Either way, it was used a lot. Especially for people who questioned authority, wandered where they shouldn't, or expressed dangerous theological theories, like suggesting God might have a sense of humor. You're told your 2-day exile isn't permanent. But don't get too cozy in town when you return. Repeat offenses lead to long-term banishment, also known as get out and don't come back. One fringe tidbit? Some colonies actually created official banishment paths, complete with mile markers and wooden benches for travelers too upset to walk efficiently. Contemplation points, they were sometimes called. That sounds peaceful, until you realize they were probably installed just so townsfolk could more easily watch you leave. You spend your first few hours in the woods feeling mildly rebellious. Like you're on a spiritual retreat you didn't sign up for. You try meditating by a creek but end up getting bitten by 3 mosquitoes and almost sitting on a snake. It hisses. You apologize instinctively. With nothing else to do, you find a tree stump and review your recent decisions. Could you have taken the longer path? Yes. Should you have read the tiny sign? Definitely. Was it fair to be exiled over a shortcut? Not really. But fairness isn't the point here. Obedience is. Evenings in exile are quieter than the quietest Quaker meeting. The woods stretch endlessly, whispering with bugs and wind. You lie on a bed of leaves and try not to think too hard about what's crawling around you. And yet, there's something oddly peaceful about it. No moral scrutiny. No sideways glances. No one measuring your coat buttons or evaluating your posture. Just you, the stars, and the sound of a raccoon doing whatever raccoons do in the dark. By the end of your second day, you're hungry, itchy, and a little paranoid about whether you now smell heretical. But you also feel lighter. You return to the settlement at dawn. There's no welcoming party. Just a small note on the main post: returned, your name, 2 days banishment completed. Next infraction equals community labeling or expulsion. Direct. Unemotional. Threatening in the dullest way possible. You rejoin the town like someone returning from a weird summer camp. People nod, but no one asks where you went. They all already know. You realize that banishment wasn't about removing you, it was about reminding everyone else what happens when you wander off course. Literally and otherwise. And as you tuck back into town life, you notice your feet automatically follow the wooden paths now. Not out of faith, just out of fear of being interesting again. You think you finally figured out the rhythm of this place. Keep your head down, avoid strong opinions, don't wear feathers, and for heaven's sake, walk on the designated footpaths. But the town always finds a new way to trip you up. This time, it's laughter. You're standing outside the cooper's workshop, watching 2 apprentices bumble their way through rolling a barrel down a slight hill. It slips, rolls sideways, and knocks over a fence post with an almost comic twang. It's objectively funny. So you laugh. Not loudly. Not rudely. Just naturally. But across the square, a woman stiffens. You recognize her, Mistress Eliza, a woman who frowns like it's her full-time profession. She marches toward you with the speed of righteous indignation and the silence of a hawk. Is mirth your priority this morning? She asks. You freeze. It was just. She raises a hand. The town council will be informed. Such lightness is unbecoming. You blink. This is a real problem? Oh yes. Because you, dear friend, have just been caught in violation of a deeply beloved colonial expectation: excessive levity, a spiritual illness believed to lead directly to sloth, gluttony, and possibly dancing. Historians still argue whether early American colonies were truly as humorless as their surviving documents make them seem. Sermons warned against laughter. Town orders banned games, jokes, and even smiling during court proceedings, which feels wildly unfair when your name is being mispronounced by a man with a powdered wig. And yes, punishment for merriment was real. You've now been assigned time in the Weeder Circle. This is not a club. It is a patch of uneven earth behind the meeting house where accused frivolous persons are forced to weed the lawn, in silence, while wearing a rope necklace labeled idle with. You protest. But I wasn't idle. I was watching people work. Exactly, Mistress Eliza replies. Mockery of labor. Twice the sin. The weeder's circle is not glamorous. You kneel in itchy grass while two other wits 18 who mimed a preacher's sneeze and an old man who told a riddle, plunk weeds into baskets. No one talks. If you hum, you lose another day. If you smile, you lose 3. A child walks past, points at you, and laughs. You instinctively smile back. Now you're stuck here till Thursday. One quirky historical detail, some colonies issued fines for laughter during courtship. The logic? Love is a serious business. No giggling. No saucy eye contact. Definitely no innuendos involving beats. You risk public reprimand and possibly being barred from community dances, assuming there were dances. Spoiler, there usually weren't. Back in the weeder's circle, you develop a system. Pull, drop, breathe. Pull, drop, breathe. You try thinking of boring things to help you keep a straight face, tax codes, the color gray, sermon titles like The Mortification of Cheer. It almost works. But then you remember the way that barrel flipped like a pancake on Sunday, and you snort. Just once. But it's enough. The warden glares, writes on her slate. Add 1 hour. You groan silently. By day's end, your hands are filthy and your knees bruised. But your face? Your face is schooled into perfect colonial neutrality. You're a statue of seriousness. The very image of godly suppression. Historians today have a hard time deciding whether this emotional austerity was purely religious or also about control. Probably both. When people laugh, they bond. And when they bond, they start getting ideas. And when they get ideas, they form a clubs. Or dokes. Or political dissent. Best to nip it in the bud. By evening, your sentence is done, at least temporarily. The rope necklace is removed, but you're told, one more display of unnecessary mirth and we'll assign you to the silence log. You don't ask what that is. You've learned better. You return to your lodging with a stony expression, your body sore and your soul slightly amused. And that's the real punishment. Not that they made you weed, or that they called you idle. It's that laughter became dangerous. Which, somehow, makes everything even funnier. You've weathered the weeder's circle and narrowly dodged the silence log, still don't know what that is, still don't want to. You've learned to swallow jokes and nod solemnly when someone says, rain is a mercy from God. Even when they're ankle deep in mud and clearly miserable. So, you think you're in the clear. Until, one drizzly morning, you're summoned. Not arrested. Just invited to appear before the Committee of Contrition. That sounds polite. It's not. You arrive in the meeting house, damp cloak clinging to your shoulders, and find yourself seated on a narrow bench across from 3 elders, one of whom is chewing something that smells vaguely like old sage. They don't look angry. They look disappointed. Have you, one asks, taken time to reflect upon your recent behavior? You blank. Which behavior? A silence follows. The bad kind. You've been vague, and vagueness is a form of evasion. Which is, itself, an offense. So begins the real punishment, confession without knowing what you're confessing to. This wasn't uncommon in colonial settlements. If you'd been reported for suspicious activity, laughing, loitering, walking too fast near a magistrate's home, you could be summoned not to be punished directly, but to be given the opportunity to preemptively apologize. And if you guessed the right sin, you might get off easy. But if you guessed wrong, or worse, refused to guess at all, you were assigned to penance duties. In your case, you're handed a set of instructions to complete what's known as a public humble task. Today's assignment? You will mend the village fence, using dull tools, under supervision, while wearing a white cloth sash with the words "Heart Still Learning" painted in black ink. It's not that anyone thinks fence mending is demeaning. It's that everyone knows you're not doing it out of neighborly spirit. You're doing it because you might have sinned. Historians still argue whether these types of penance tasks were genuinely about repentance or just a more theatrical way to enforce conformity. Probably both. Either way, they were popular. There's something satisfyingly ironic about a system that punishes moral uncertainty with yard work. One fringe tidbit? Some penance assignments were purely symbolic. In certain towns, people were made to carry small wooden burdens, a block labeled guilt, or a rock labeled pride from one end of the village to the other. Repeatedly. And no, you weren't allowed to trade burdens with someone else. That would be confusion of conscience. You begin your task. The fence is splintered, crooked, and about as straight as colonial theology. You hammer a few nails, which promptly bend. You try again. Under the watchful eye of a boy no older than 10 who's apparently been assigned as your moral overseer. He doesn't say much. But when you pause too long to wipe your brow, he coughs loudly and writes something in chalk on a little slate, probably your slowness. By midday, people pass by pretending not to look at your sash. No one says anything. But the silence is loud. The message is clear. Oh, look. The one who's maybe guilty. The worst part? You still don't know what you're being punished for. And that's not an accident. Colonial contrition rituals weren't about truth. They were about submission. If you confessed, whether guilty or not, you re-entered the fold. If you resisted, well, there were always more fences. Or worse, the pillory. Again, eventually, a council member walks by and gives a slight nod. That's your sign. You're allowed to stop. You remove the sash and hand it to the boy, who tucks it into a small chest labeled contrition cloths. It's half full. You're not the first. You won't be the last. As you walk away, exhausted and a little splinter-covered, you realize how clever the punishment was. No pain. No shouting. No obvious scar. Just the invisible kind, the kind that makes you watch your every word, step, and sigh. And worse, it teaches you to apologize for things you don't even understand. That night, you sit quietly in your cot, replaying the last few days. You recall the way you walked too briskly past a magistrate's cart. You remember humming, once, on a Monday. You even think back to a dream you told someone about, in which you ran in church. Maybe that was it. You'll never know. And that's the beauty of it. Unremarkable punishments thrive in uncertainty. Not harsh enough to spark rebellion. Not clear enough to provoke sympathy. Just subtle enough to keep you compliant. You lie down, close your eyes, and whisper an apology to the ceiling. Just in case. You've confessed to a mystery crime, survived silent reading, avoided dance-related disgrace, and learned to restrain your facial expressions to two options, neutral and concerned. But this next punishment? It's so small, so exquisitely petty, you nearly miss it. It starts at the bakery. You wait in line for your ration, 3-course buns and a lump of something that may or may not be cheese. You chat, cautiously, with the woman ahead of you, remarking that the bread seems fresher than usual. A harmless comment. Or so you think. Behind the counter, the baker, a stout man with arms like tree trunks and eyes like thimbles, narrows his gaze. "Oh," he says. "So you're an expert now." You blank. "No, I just meant, you've made bread before?" "No." "Then how would you know what's fresh?" The line falls silent. You suddenly realize, you've committed public judgment. And in the colonial world, where hierarchy, humility, and relentless conformity rule, that's enough to trigger a punishment known as the correction of perspective. What does that mean? It means the next morning, you're escorted to the low seat at the front of the town square, a stool so small and slanted that it's been nicknamed the crick chair by the locals. You're to sit there for 4 hours holding a wooden sign that reads, "I spoke out of turn and above my station." It's not the stocks. It's not shameful enough to warrant pity. It's just annoying. Ridiculous. Thoroughly colonial. Historians still argue whether the crick chair existed in all settlements or just the more obsessive ones. But the spirit of it definitely did. Punishments like this weren't about fixing real problems. They were about fixing attitudes, or at least, suppressing them. The idea was to physically lower you in the social space. Make you sit while others stood. Make you watch their feet go by. Make you feel, ever so slightly, beneath. One fringe tidbit: in some towns, these low chairs were designed with a single short leg, so they'd always wobble slightly. Just enough to prevent rest. And, presumably, to shake the arrogance right out of you. You sit for 2 hours. Then 3. People pass. Some nod politely. Others smirk. No one speaks. You try to maintain a passive expression, but your thighs ache, your pride itches, and your nose runs in the wind. A child points at your sign and asks their mother, "What does it mean?" "It means he forgot his place," she answers, without looking at you. By hour 4, you've developed a very clear understanding of your place. But even worse? You begin to question whether you really had judged that bread too harshly. Maybe you did sound superior. Maybe the crust was fine, And you were just being fancy. Maybe your tongue is what needs reforming, not the recipe. That's how the system works. It teaches you to gaslight yourself. By the time you are allowed to stand, your knees crack audibly. You hand the sign back to the baker, who receives it without a word. He doesn't smile. But he doesn't glower either. Just nods once, like the matter has been resolved. You walk home feeling foolish. Not for what you said, but for saying it where people could hear you. The lesson: in early America, criticism without permission was not free speech, it was moral drift. The authorities didn't fear rebellion. They feared opinion. Because opinion led to questions. And questions. Well, that led to Rhode Island. Later that week, you see a different man seated in the crick chair. His sign reads, "I guess too confidently about the weather." You make brief eye contact. You share the smallest nod of solidarity. And then you keep walking. Head down. Mouth shut. Buns unreviewed. You're finally learning to exist here like a shadow, bland, obedient, and free of unsolicited weather forecasts. So naturally, just when you start to believe you've escaped further notice, a boy runs up to you in the street, panting, and shoves a folded piece of paper into your hand. "Magistrate wants to see you," he says. You pause, scan the note. It's handwritten in stiff, blocky letters, "Reported once for failure of demeanor." That's not even a verb. You consider running, but let's be honest, you wouldn't get far in those buckled shoes. So, you do what you've learned to do best, report. The town magistrate sits in a tall back chair that looks uncomfortable on purpose. He gestures for you to stand directly before him, like some tragic statue. "You've been observed walking," he says, with too little gravity. You blink. Walking too lightly. Too much swing in the arms. The appearance of frivolity. You look down at your arms, which now feel treacherous. Apparently, your sin today is gait-based misconduct. And so, you're sentenced to a day of weighted walking, a punishment designed not to hurt, but to correct posture, attitude, and your obviously suspicious springiness. You're fitted with a pair of weighted wristbands, each about the heft of a small loaf of bread, and 2 ankle straps that gently jingle with each step, so everyone can hear you learning. Your route is a loop around the central green. 1 full lap, every hour, for the rest of the day. It seems easy. Until hour 2. The weights aren't heavy, but they're persistent. By lap 3, your shoulders ache. By lap 4, you develop an unsettling awareness of how often you normally swing your arms while walking. It's a lot. The town watches silently. They know the sound of weighted walking. It's the sound of bells that aren't festive. Historians still argue about whether this punishment was more behavioral or theatrical. Some say it was meant to mimic the burden of sin. Others say it was simply to make you look ridiculous without leaving bruises. Either way, it works. One French tidbit: in some New Haven settlements, offenders had to wear mood collars while walking, stiff cloth neck wraps painted with corrective phrases like "too merry" or "needs thoughtfulness." They had to be worn with exaggerated posture and zero eye contact. You're spared the collar. Lucky you. But the sound of your feet dragging and your wrists jangling feels humiliating enough. Children follow behind for 1 lap, mocking your pace. Adults don't laugh, but their eyes flick toward you like you're a misplaced chicken in a library. Somewhere around lap 5, it starts to rain. Not a heavy storm, just that soft, wet drizzle that somehow feels colder than snow. It soaks your sleeves, dampens your shoes, and doubles the weight of everything. Still, you keep walking, because if you stop, the next punishment will be worse. You remember an old tale someone told you the other night, in whispered tones at the edge of the tavern fire, about a man in a nearby colony who refused weighted walking. They sentenced him to echo duty, a full day spent repeating every sentence spoken aloud in the town square, to show the burden of careless words. Apparently, he didn't last past lunch. At lap 7, your feet ache. Your calves feel like wet rope. But there's something else creeping in too. Shame's quieter cousin, self-consciousness. You don't just feel punished, you feel ridiculous. And that's the genius of it. This punishment doesn't wound the body. It dents the soul. It makes you question why you ever moved with confidence, why your arms ever swayed, why your pace ever dared to express even a hint of joy. By sundown, you've completed your laps. The weights are removed. The bells are silent, but your arms still tingle. Your steps feel off. And you can't shake the sense that walking has become dangerous. Back in your room, you lie down, legs twitching, and wonder what they'll invent next. You've heard rumors of shoe disobedience, people punished for making too much noise on cobblestones. Also, hat insolence, which involves wearing a brim too wide for one station. It seems there's no end to what counts as a moral failing here. Not in action, not in speech, but in the way you carry yourself. And that, somehow, is the most exhausting thing of all. The morning fog hangs heavy, like a wool blanket someone forgot to wash. You shuffle through it cautiously, arms stiff at your sides, still recovering from yesterday's weighted gait shame parade. You try to appear solemn but neutral. Not too slow. Not too purposeful. That's the balance now. You're not walking. You're surviving locomotion. You think maybe, just maybe, this day might pass without incident. And then you yawn. Not dramatically. Not cartoonishly. Just a quiet, involuntary stretch of the jaw and a brief puff of air. You barely even register it, but someone else does. A school monitor, maybe 11 years old, points at you from the chapel steps and calls out, "Unruly display of slothful spirit." You've been yawn-snitched. Before you can defend your yawn as the universal symptom of a poorly ventilated sleep shed, you're brought before the town pedagogue, who wears robes that smell like preserved onions and disappointment. "You have been observed publicly expressing signs of moral fatigue," he says. "Tell us, when did you last read your daily devotions?" You scramble for a lie. You land on Tuesday. "It is Thursday," he says coldly. And just like that, you're assigned to word repetition duty. The punishment is simple, maddening, and profoundly boring. You'll be required to sit outside the chapel for the entire day with a small slate board, upon which you must write the same moral phrase 500 times. You must show it to a rotating panel of observers. If the handwriting deteriorates, or if you miss a word, you start over. Today's assigned phrase, "Diligence is the servant of salvation," a classic, rolls right off the tongue after the first 100 iterations. You're given a small bench, an even smaller shade umbrella, and 2 dull chalk nubs. The first 15 repetitions feel quaint, like you're an understimulated monk. By number 76, your hand cramps. By number 143, you're questioning the spelling of diligence. By 209, you are certain you've used that word too many times and it has lost all meaning. That's kind of the point. Historians still argue whether this punishment came from old world monastic traditions or if it was invented fresh by colonial educators who simply hated whimsy. Either way, it stuck. The act of writing something over and over was meant to push the lesson not just into your memory, but into your character. And unlike public shaming, word repetition duty didn't attract a crowd. No one jeered. No one threw cabbage. It was just lonely, spectatorless repentance. One fringe tidbit: in certain settlements, the slate itself had to be scrubbed and polished between every 50 lines using pennant and vinegar, a diluted mix of herbs and brine thought to absorb spiritual impurities. Spoiler, it mostly just stung your fingertips. You soldier on. The sun climbs. Your back stiffens. A girl passes and asks why you're in the writing chair. You smile, just a little. Bad theology hygiene, you mutter. No one laughs. By mid-afternoon, your fingers are white with chalk dust and your phrase now reads something like Dalliance's th. Servant of Savletish. You present it to a passing councilwoman. She frowns. Your penmanship expresses doubt. You're told to begin again, and so you do. You whisper the sentence under your breath with every stroke. It becomes a chant. A meaningless, syllabic drone. Like chewing on fabric. You're not sure what it means anymore. You only know that you were supposed to mean it. At 500, your slate is weighed. Not literally. But your chalk nubs are examined. Your eyes scan for signs of deception or sarcasm. You pass, barely. The board is taken. You are dismissed. You shuffle away, your hand curled like a claw. Your brain echoes the sentence for the next hour, involuntarily. You try replacing the words with soup ingredients to stay sane. Carrots are the base of bisque. It doesn't help. That evening, while eating bread that tastes like apology, you wonder, what happens if you simply run out of acceptable expressions? Can you be punished for silence? Yes. You've heard of it. The mute rebuke. A man once decided to answer every question with a nod for 3 days. He was fined, flogged with dandelions, and made to deliver a speech titled "The Harm of Withheld Words." Even quiet was monitored. You lay in bed, hand twitching, and dream of a world where you could yawn without oversight. A place where sentences weren't weapons. Where phrases didn't become prisons. But here, words are tools, and sometimes, torture. The chalk dust has barely left your fingertips, and already you're being watched again. This time, it's for something even more subtle, more ambient. You haven't spoken out of turn, haven't walked too gaily, haven't even sighed audibly in the presence of a Puritan. No. Your crime is inconsistency of attendance. You missed one of the week's many community readings. Not the big Sunday gathering. Just the Tuesday evening vigil on temperance and bread making, hosted by Elder Hiram, who once spoke uninterrupted for an hour about restraint and eating. You'd meant to go. You'd even started walking there. But it was raining, and your knees still ached from the crick chair. So you turned back. And now you're on a list. No trial, no dramatic punishment. Just a letter slipped under your door. Your absence has been noticed. Let the body not forget its rhythm. What follows is your sentence. Bell watch duty. It's deceptively gentle. You're to report to the chapel's bell tower each morning at dawn for 1 week. Not to ring the bell. That would be too purposeful. No, you are to sit beside the bell, and watch it. Record when it sways from the wind. Note every spiderweb that shifts. Reflect on the silent discipline of an object that only acts when asked. In other words, be like the bell. The ladder up to the bell tower is steep and oddly sticky. You reach the top with your breath already out of sync. A small wooden stool and a single quill sit by the bell's base, beside a logbook titled Stillness and Vigil. Day 1. The bell does not move. Day 2. A breeze stirs its rope. You record this in cursive so tidy it feels false. Day 3. A bird lands on the sill. You whisper hello. It leaves. You cross out the word hello and write observation. Bird passed without engagement. Historians still argue whether bell watch duty originated from Anglican monasteries or New England's homegrown obsession with orderly devotion. Regardless, the intent is unmistakable, to make you feel small, still, and silently ashamed. One French tidbit: in some towns, watchers were required to stare at their own reflections in a polished copper bell while reciting psalms about judgment. Bells were not just tools, they were symbols of obedience. They hung there, dignified, until asked to sing. And you? You had strayed from the rhythm. You had become unpredictable. By day 4, you begin to envy the bell. It never forgets where it's supposed to be. Never yawns. Never questions whether temperance and bread making was really worth attending. It just waits. Faithful. Patient. You, meanwhile, start to crumble. The silence grows louder with each shift. Thoughts echo. Did you miss other things too? Did someone see you linger too long near the bakery window on fast day? Did you nod with too much enthusiasm at someone's hymn? By day 5, you write in the logbook, bell unmoving. But the sound lives in its stillness. That's either profound or evidence you're starting to lose your grip on reality. The magistrate reads your log and nods. The penitent finds poetry. You're not sure if that's a compliment or just an ominous note to file somewhere in your growing dossier. On the last day of your sentence, you climb the ladder more slowly. The bell looks the same, but you've changed. You sit. Wait. Listen. And then, as if on cue, a breeze nudges the bell ever so slightly, producing a soft creak, not a ring. Just the memory of sound. You nod to yourself. There's a lesson here. Maybe about humility. Maybe about compliance. Or maybe about the terrifying efficiency of a system that can make silently sitting beside an inanimate object feel like moral resurrection. You descend the ladder. Your logbook is stamped complete. No fanfare. No forgiveness. Just resumption. You are expected to now return to the rhythm. Your absences have been accounted for. You are realigned. That night, as you fall asleep, your ears ring faintly. Not from sound, but from imagining sound, from waiting for it. Because here, even absence is a kind of presence. And even silence has weight. You awaken before dawn, not from a bell or a summons, but out of habit. Or perhaps something deeper, an instinct, honed by punishment, that tells you it's best to always be a little ahead of expectation. The room is quiet. Outside, the frost glimmers on the windowsill. You stretch only halfway. Fully stretching might suggest comfort. And today is not about comfort. Today is about the final correction. You're not told in advance what your sentence is. Just another folded note left on your door. A soul overly concerned with self may benefit from reflection through others. Report for redirection. You show up, of course. You always do. You're greeted by a deacon with round cheeks and sharp eyes. He smiles thinly and says, "Your actions, though minor, have accumulated. Today, you'll be a mirror walker." You nod slowly, pretending you've heard of this. You have not. Here's how it works. For the entire day, you are assigned to follow another member of the settlement. You will mirror their movements, walk when they walk, work when they work, pause when they pause. You must do so with no commentary and no deviation. Your partner is Mistress Ruth, the deacon announces, gesturing toward a small woman in her 50s with the gait of a goose and the posture of a judgmental fence post. She does not greet you. The rules are strict. You may walk half a pace behind. You must not speak unless spoken to. Your hands must be positioned precisely as hers are. If she carries a bucket, you carry a second bucket. If she sweeps, you sweep the air beside her. It sounds ridiculous. It is ridiculous. And yet, it is one of the most quietly devastating punishments you've yet endured. From the first moment, you're not just stripped of choice. You're stripped of self. Every movement becomes borrowed. Every decision outsourced. You are a ghost with chores. Historians still argue whether mirror walking began in Europe or was invented in the colonies as a corrective ritual for self-important thinkers. Some believe it stemmed from early theater practices, used to humble loud performers. Others say it was adapted from indigenous observances of imitation as teaching. Either way, it quickly became a tool for curbing perceived pride, misalignment, or simply too much individuality. One French tidbit: in one particularly strict Rhode Island township, mirror walkers had to wear a mask painted with a blank expression to emphasize their status as a non-entity. They called it Face of the Still One. Unsurprisingly, none of those masks survived. Most were destroyed by the wearers the moment their sentence ended. Mistress Ruth doesn't make it easy. She walks at odd angles. She wipes her brow constantly. She scratches her knee. And you do it all. Slightly delayed, always visible. Children watch. Adults pretend not to. You carry buckets that aren't full, sweep where there's no dust, knead dough that's not yours. The weight is psychic. And heavier than your old chalk, your ankle bells, even the shame of the creak chair. You are not a person today. You are an echo. By mid-afternoon, your body aches, not from labor, but from resisting yourself. You almost scratch your own elbow on instinct. But Mistress Ruth does not. So you don't. She eats lunch. You mimic each bite, each chew. She wipes her mouth with her sleeve. You do the same. You hate how familiar it's all becoming. There's a moment, brief but electric, when she trips slightly on a stone and catches herself. Your feet, reacting to the moment, don't trip. You realize you've betrayed the choreography. You've been yourself for a fraction of a second. She notices. She frowns. She scribbles something on a slip of paper and hands it to a passing watchboy. You dread the consequences, but they never come. Maybe because she, too, is human. Maybe because she knows. Maybe because in that 1 second of divergence, you mirrored something real. The day ends. The deacon returns, inspects your dust-covered apron and hollow eyes, and says, "Lesson received." You nod. You don't even know what the lesson is anymore. Later, in your cot, you stretch your arms slowly, just to see if you still can. You walk across the room with your own rhythm. It feels strange. Like learning to speak again after miming all day. You lie down and think about every punishment you've survived. Each one dull, unremarkable, quiet. No blood, no gallows, no drama. Just adjustments. Shifts. Sanded down corners. They call it order. Discipline. Correction. You call it erosion. And yet, tomorrow, you will rise again. You will dress plainly. You will follow the path. Because that is the genius of these punishments. They do not break you. They simply convince you to hold the hammer yourself. And now, with the lights low and the room quiet around you, let's step back from the cobbled streets and clattering shoes and whispering bell towers. Let the sounds of the Colonial Square fade. Soft footsteps, the hush of a clerk's quill, the muffled turn of a wooden latch. You're safe here now. No one's watching how you breathe. No one's asking if your sleeves are too wide or your thoughts too lively. Here, in this moment, you don't need permission to shift your weight or let your eyes wander. You don't have to write anything down or mirror anyone's gait. You've walked through a world where punishments didn't scream, they whispered. Where the gravest sin was not believing, but being noticed. And where the punishment for that was never dramatic. It was just exhausting, but you made it through. Quietly. Gently. Smartly. So take a deep breath now. Let it stretch your chest. Let it sigh. Let your fingers soften. Let your mind wander far from wooden benches and chalky slates. The fire's gone out. The bell is still. And there's no one left to impress. Just the night. And your breath. And the slow, sleepy exhale of a story finished.
Dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh. Thì chớp nhán nhán được rồi. dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh.
Quay nó không có rõ đâu, không quay không có rõ đâu. Máy xịn kìa, nhưng máy này quay đâu.
Thì chớp chớp nhán nhán được rồi. thẳng tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh.
Quay nó có đỏ đâu, không quay không có đỏ. Máy xịn kìa, chứ máy này quay đâu.
Thì chớp chớp nhán nhán được rồi.